also thanks ACVIM for pulling this together. This has been something I've been super excited to do for a really long time, like years, right? Just because, you know, I'm married to a veterinarian and she's a specialist. She's a small animal internist that practices here in Denver. And, you know, she's really struggled with her student loans, and I have student loans, and I've always, you know, wanted to be able to get to you all academicians, specialists in this capacity, because you guys have some really unique challenges when it comes to your student loans, mostly because of the residency pathway and the you know, the academic potential for you to stay on and work for a veterinary institution, which brings into the picture public service loan forgiveness, which is what I wanted to focus on today for this particular group of ACVIM. But all of that depends on you doing a good physical exam, knowing your student loans. And there's been a ton of changes that have happened recently that, you know, are going to help, but it's also very difficult to make sure that you can make sense of all those changes, right? And so I peppered in throughout the presentation here some of the questions that you guys all submitted during your when you registered for this session. So hopefully we'll answer all those, and then additionally feel free to ask any questions that you have along the way here. So definitely a lot of changes, right? So what we see here, my loan servicer changed after COVID, or for some of us it was before. Will you automatically be re-enrolled to a suitable plan? You never want to assume that you're going to be automatically enrolled in a suitable plan, right? So you really have to check that out, and I'll show you how you can do that by looking at your student loans and using some of the free tools that we have available on VIN Foundation in the Student Debt Center, right? So you could do that, what I call physical exam of your student loans, right? So there's a lot baked in this one question. You know, who is your loan servicer? If it changed, did all of the information come over from your prior loan history that has you in the plan that you think you should be in? And then the next question is that the best plan for me, right? Suitable IBR plan, right? So IBR, income-based repayment, that's a specific type of repayment plan. And unfortunately, it's probably not the best one, right? Especially now that we've had some changes take effect recently. So you want to see which income-driven plan you're actually using. What named plan do you see in your student loan physical exam? And then we can also start looking at whether or not you're documenting that public service loan forgiveness progress, right? So all of these things are stuff that you can check in on using the tools that we have available from VIN Foundation and using your federal student aid data file. Whether or not you should consolidate your loans, that's also part of that decision, as to, you know, it depends on what we find in this student loan physical exam. Now, private loans are a completely different beast, right? We can certainly talk about them to the extent that you have questions. Most frequently, I see veterinarians who have all federal student loans, right? Now, some of you may have some private loans peppered in there from maybe before veterinary school. Most veterinarians I see with private loans, those were used to supplement their undergraduate education, because there are loan limits in undergraduate education where private loans are more of a necessity. Grad school, veterinary school, not so much, right? So you can finance that entire educational endeavor using federal student loans, and most people do. So if you have specific private student loan questions, ask them, but a lot of that's going to depend on what the contract was when you sign your master promissory note when you took out those private loans. They're all a little bit different, but they're not eligible for things like public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment, right? So private loans are outside of the federal student loan system. So I'm sure, you know, Becca probably mentioned this, but, you know, the forbearance benefits are over, right? So they ended at the end of August. Interest started 5 days ago. Payments are going to start back up in October, depending on what plan you're using, right? And what, you know, income documentation you may have provided. You do get forgiveness credit for that forbearance benefit period. That's a question that's been coming up a lot. And if you made any payments during that forbearance period, I would highly recommend requesting a refund, particularly as many questions as I saw about public service loan forgiveness. Nobody should be making payments during that forbearance period, right? You want to pay as little as your income requires you to, so you have the maximum amount forgiven under public service loan forgiveness, right? So you still have an opportunity to request a refund, right? So but you have to call your loan servicer directly to request that refund. All right, so let's head over to that student aid data file, and hopefully my my internet here will will kind of stay together long enough to be able to do that. All right, great. So I am going to log in here. And this is how you can, this is the first step in the student loan physical exam process. So going to studentaid.gov and logging in. All right, we'll see if I can get that code sent to me quickly here. All right, wow, that was super fast. Given what's going on in my neighborhood, that's amazing. All right, so when you log into studentaid.gov, you're going to see some summary information. This is the first thing, this is my share of our household student loan balance. And I'll tell you more about kind of how we handle our student loans later in the presentation. But this is my student loan balance, principal, interest, but it doesn't give me the information I'm looking for. So I have to hit this view details button here. And that's going to take me to this next My Aid page. And I'm looking for this download My Aid data button. Right now, if you're viewing this on a phone or some kind of tablet device that doesn't allow you to save files to it, I'm going to encourage you to visit, using a laptop or some other kind of computer where you can download a file to it, right? So you're going to have to save this file, click this button, and it saves to your computer, right? So it's this text file, this TXT, that's the format we want to keep it in, right? So download that to your computer. And then we'll come back over here and I'll show you what you can do with that file in just a second. And that's where we're going to explore those VIN Foundation Student Debt Center resources, right? So I'm going to head over to the My Student Loans page. Yep. And I'm going to, this is going to ask you to log in. So one of the cool things I wanted to share with you guys, in case you didn't know this already, everybody at an academic institution, at a veterinary academic institution, has free access to VIN. Right, we need you to have a username and password, just when it comes to the student debt stuff, so we know we're just helping veterinarians, right? Because this stuff gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, and our primary responsibility is to veterinarians and veterinary students, right? So if you have that VIN username and password, you can use it to log in, and then you will be able to save your progress here. But it also gives you access to the student debt message board folder too. So I'm going to log in just so I make sure I go through that step. All right, I'm going to head over to the My Student Loans page. All right, this is where I'm really going to test this internet here. So now I'm going to upload that student aid data file that I just saved. Right, and I've got some additional ones here that I will use as an example. I know this is in here somewhere. Sorry, thanks for the patience as I kind of navigate this on a device that I don't normally use. Here we go. There it is. All right, so this is an example of somebody's student aid file that we'll use as kind of a case for the presentation here. Right, so this is somebody who has $250,000 of principal, $56,000 of unpaid interest, total of a little over $300,000. We see the weighted average interest rate across all of the 25 loans that are remaining, $1,300 of interest per month, right? So we can see it's broken down. I can look and see which repayment plan I'm using. If I hit that show details button, that is over here, right? So in any of the loan groups or loan types section, if I hit the show details, I'll see the repayment plan information that's listed in the file, right? That's how I can double check what my loan servicer is telling me or showing me as well, right? So I know that this person's using Pay As You Earn, which is a type of income-driven repayment plan. So I'm going to head there next. Which income-driven plans am I eligible to use? So I see a variety of different types of plans here. And this is why you have to be very careful with the language you use, particularly when you're speaking with your loan servicers, right? So everybody tends to call these plans, quote, IBR, right? But unfortunately, IBR refers to a specific type of repayment plan in the income-driven universe, right? And IBR is generally not the plan that you want to be in, at least right now, right? You don't really want to be using that while you're either doing a residency or while you're working towards public service loan forgiveness, because there are better options for you to either lower your payment and make sure you're maximizing that amount that's forgiven, right? But for this particular person, we know they're eligible for the original version of IBR, right? So the older version, pay as you earn, which is the plan that they're using, and then this newer plan called Saving on a Valuable Education, which was formerly known as Revised Pay as you earn. So that's a change that just took effect recently. Everybody that was using Revised Pay as you earn previously will be automatically converted to this new SAVE plan, right? But generally speaking, this SAVE plan is going to be the most beneficial, particularly for anybody that's working towards public service loan forgiveness. Right? So that's what I'm looking for, right? Which plan are you currently using? Which plans are you eligible to use? And is there potentially a better one for you? I know one of the other things that's going to come up is this newer version of IBR, right? So I'm always also looking to see who is eligible for the new version of IBR versus the old version, right? Because if you're eligible for the new version, there's a potential for you to use SAVE and switch to the new version if you're not going to end up reaching public service loan forgiveness. So I saw a few questions about that in the registration as well. People asking, what happens if I move outside of academia at some point, right? What's the strategy for handling that? And generally, the best strategy for that is going to be using SAVE while you're either in a residency or working towards public service loan forgiveness. And then if you move away from that pathway, if you're eligible, you can switch to the new version of IBR, right? Because that's going to have you reach forgiveness sooner, which will help depending on your financial circumstances, right? But you have to be eligible for it to even have that as an option. This particular person doesn't have that as an option, right? But they're also very close to public service loan forgiveness, right? So if I hit this PSLF status tab, I can see how much time they've logged towards public service loan forgiveness, right? And they're doing quite well, right? They're very, very close. You need 120 monthly qualifying payments in order to have your loans forgiven under public service loan forgiveness. So they're very, very close, right? But I also see that they have some other loans that don't have the same amount of qualifying forgiveness time. Right? So this is just an example of all the things that you can learn by grabbing your student aid data file and uploading it to the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. Right? If I see this screams to me consolidate. Right? Now they've already got a consolidation loan, right? But you can consolidate previously consolidated loans with additional loans that haven't been consolidated. Right. And because of the super beneficial benefit that's currently in place called the one-time forgiveness count adjustment, which we're going to talk about in more detail, we can actually transfer all of the public service loan forgiveness qualifying time on these loans onto this loan if we consolidate them all before the end of this year. Right. So there's all of these things that are floating around. That one-time forgiveness count adjustment is a limited time benefit. Right. But if you see that you've got differing amounts of repayment time, particularly qualifying for public service loan forgiveness, that should plant the seed that consolidation would make a lot of sense for you, right? Particularly before the end of this year. Right. So that's just, one example of how we can use this My Student Loans tool in order to do a physical exam of our student loans and then start asking the next set of questions that we might need or have regarding what to do next. I also see from this person's file that they made payments during the forbearance period. Right now, that could have been an automatic payment that triggered at the very beginning, which is quite common, or they could have been making payments along the way, because one of the common misunderstandings I hear from a lot of veterinarians was I thought I needed to continue making payments in order for the forbearance to count towards public service loan forgiveness. And that's not true. Right. All of the time, even with the payment shut off, as long as you're still working for a qualifying organization, which anybody who's at an academic institution would still be eligible for public service loan forgiveness credit during that particular time frame. Right. So grab that student aid data file from studentaid.gov, download that text file, upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool, and ask any questions about what you're seeing in here. right? So just from that one physical exam, we can answer all of these questions that are in here, right? So those are, and if you also see an amount of public service loan forgiveness time that doesn't align with what you think you should have, right? So I saw a lot of people who said, hey, I'm really close to public service loan forgiveness. How do I know, right? Well, this is how you're going to know, right? If you don't see any months logged in that public service loan forgiveness status tab, then you need to submit a public service loan forgiveness employment certification form, and sooner rather than later, right? So you can get that time counted and you can be assured that you're working towards public service loan forgiveness. All right, so this
Hey,
is the first one.
Tony,
Yeah, go ahead.
there's a good question in the Q&A that I've seen quite a few times. So I wanted to bring it up here. Is there a specific provider for consolidation? I've heard several people say they consolidated and then no longer qualified for several of these plans. And I know that's something we've been hearing a lot on the boards is concern about that.
Yeah, I'm not really. So the plans are the plans don't depend on your loan servicer, right? Your loan servicer is just the named entity who is behind the phones and the website for, you know, when you call or when you make payments, right? So all of these things that we're talking about, the income-driven repayment plans, public service loan forgiveness, applying for a repayment plan, and documenting public service loan forgiveness progress, none of that has anything to do with your loan servicer specifically. Right now, if you're working towards public service loan forgiveness and you have a loan servicer other than MOHELA, then you definitely want to submit one of those employment certification forms, right? So one of the, let's say, oddities, if you want to call it that, when you document or kind of submit one of those employment certification forms, there is one of the loan servicers who is in charge of monitoring that progress. So no matter who your loan servicer was before, they will move that loan to, or move your federal student loans over to MOHELA. It used to be Fed Loan Servicing, but they quit or got fired, and MOHELA was now designated the official monitor of people who are working towards public service loan forgiveness. Right. So if you are in your My Student Loans tool summary and you click on the loan servicer tab and you see somebody other than MOHELA listed here, then you haven't submitted a public service loan forgiveness employment certification form yet. Right. So no matter who your loan servicer is in here, once you submit that employment certification form, it will get switched to MOHELA. Now you do have an opportunity to choose a loan servicer, but only when you're consolidating loans. Right. So if it turns out that you would benefit from a direct consolidation loan, then you're going to want to choose MOHELA as your loan servicer, right? Because that way you'll reduce the amount of time and complexity associated with your loans getting eventually moved to MOHELA anyway, right? Anybody that is going to work towards public service loan forgiveness and hopes to receive it is going to have to go through MOHELA at some point, right? So better to choose them during the consolidation process if you need to consolidate, right? So for this person who would benefit from consolidating again, right, they would want to choose MOHELA again as their loan servicer, but this time probably apply for SAVE since the payment will be otherwise lower than it would be under pay-as-you-earn. That's a good question. Any other ones like that that kind of meet that where we are in the content currently?
Do kind of want to back up a second because there is a question here that I think it's a good one to move forward with. Isn't the forgiveness amount considered taxable income? So paying it down there in the forbearance would help a bit to reduce the tax hit on the forgiveness.
Yeah, I'll cover that in just a few, right? So public service loan forgiveness is tax-free, right? So, and generally speaking, if you're going to hit forgiveness, you don't want to pay anything extra. You're just going to waste your money. Right now, you're 100% wasting that money if you hit public service loan forgiveness. Right, so there's really not a good reason for anybody to make extra payments towards their student loans if the eventual outcome is going to be loan forgiveness. Right, and public service loan forgiveness, I wouldn't even bother with it. Now, income-driven repayments a little bit more nuanced, but generally speaking, if you're projected to hit forgiveness, even under an income-driven plan, it doesn't make sense to pay more than your income requires, right? A lot of people want to reduce that potential tax, right? But that's actually going to end up having you voluntarily paying more towards your loans than you have to. Right? So pay the minimum required by your income, particularly if you're on a path to reach public service loan forgiveness, but also if you're likely to reach forgiveness under an income-driven plan as well. And we're going to talk about that difference, right? So I think a lot of that confusion comes from the public service loan forgiveness versus income-driven plan forgiveness, which are two distinct yet kind of related things. Okay, so two different ways primarily to approach paying back your student loans. Time-driven, right? So this is like a traditional, conventional repayment option, right? So we take your principal, interest rate, and the amount of time that you want to pay back that loan, and we calculate a level monthly payment to reach zero in that specified period of time, right? So a 10-year repayment plan, right, for $200,000 loan balance at roughly 6% is going to require about $2,000 or $2,100 a month to extinguish that balance in that 10-year time frame, right? That's a time-driven plan. Your federal student loans can be paid under a time-driven plan. All private loans are paid under some version of a time-driven plan. Right? But the problem with the time-driven plans, with the amounts that we see for veterinarians, is that the monthly payments are quite high, right? So these are not very conducive to having a financial strategy other than just paying back your student loans, right? And and they're also sometimes not the most financially beneficial. Although for anybody who wants to pay the least amount of money over the least amount of time, that generally is a time-driven plan, right? So if we've got $200,000 of student loans, want to pay it off in 10 years, $2,200 a month, and that's going to cost me about $63,000 of interest, right? So that's generally how you're going to pay the quote least amount over the least amount of time. However, your federal student loans have these income-driven plans, right? So the names of the different plans, and then we also have public service loan forgiveness, which is not a repayment plan, it's actually a benefit, right? But you have to use one of these income-driven plans in order to reach that benefit, right? Making payments based on your income. Right? So getting out of debt without it taking longer and paying more than I originally owed. Well, that's pretty tough in general, right? There's always going to be interest associated here, right? Like we even see with a time-driven plan, there's some amount that we pay above what we borrowed because we didn't use our own money. We used somebody else's money. So we get charged interest for that privilege of using somebody else's money. Right now, there are instances, and quite frequently, I see people who are projected to reach public service loan forgiveness or even income-driven plan forgiveness can end up paying less than they borrowed, particularly with veterinary education size student debt balances, right? So if you really want to pay the least amount possible in the least amount of time, then public service loan forgiveness is what you want to shoot for, right? Which is a potential for many of you. All right, so this is kind of what this looked like about 2 weeks ago, right? And since then, it's changed, right? So revised pay as you earn became save, right? That's currently the case, right? So repay was switched to save, and it just took effect a couple of weeks ago. As part of those same changes, they're going to phase out pay as you earn, right? Anybody that's using pay as you earn can keep using it. But if you're not using it after July 1st of 2024, you're not going to be able to choose it. ICR is also going to be phased out. That's not a huge deal because it's not really a very good repayment plan anyway. And then the old version of IBR is going to become obsolete, right? Anybody who's using the old version of IBR, and many of you asked about that in your registration, in the registrations for this webinar, you're going to want to move those loans over to the new SAVE plan. Maybe not right now, but at least by the next time you're due to renew, right? If you've got a really favorable, there's another question that came up. If I've got a really low payment right now, does it make sense to switch? Well, maybe not right now, but the next time you have to provide income information, you're going to want to switch from that old version of IBR to the new SAVE plan because your payment is going to be significantly lower than if you remained with the old version of IBR. There's also this opportunity to switch, right? So now we have, depending on your eligibility for the new version of IBR and what your career plans are going forward, if you're not going to hit public service loan forgiveness, then there might be an opportunity for you to use SAVE, switch to the new version of IBR, and hit forgiveness sooner, which can generally keep your costs down compared to a time-driven plan. And public service loan forgiveness isn't in this list because it's not a repayment plan, right? You have to use one of these repayment plans while working for an eligible employer to reach public service loan forgiveness. All right, so what are the payments? How do they calculate these payments? And this is where there's going to be a lot of shifting, but generally speaking, they're basic math equations, right? They're going to take your taxable income, your AGI, ideally from a recently filed tax return, your adjusted gross income. They're going to subtract off an allowance, right? The allowance is increased for the new SAVE plan, which is what makes SAVE have the lowest monthly payment of all the income-driven plans. And then they're going to take about 10% of that. Right? It ranges between 5 and 10% based on your proportion of undergraduate balance to graduate school balance. But because veterinary school is so expensive, everybody that has both an undergrad and graduate school balance, the proportion is highly weighted towards the graduate school, right? So we generally use 10% when we're estimating the discretionary income for SAVE. Some of you might have a slightly lower percent of that, which is just going to be a bigger benefit to you if you have some undergraduate loans, but that's why there's the range there. And SAVE is the only one that has that range. All the other plans don't take into account the difference between your undergrad and graduate school balance if you do have undergrad student loans. Pay as you earn is 10% of a different discretionary income, and then the old version of IBR is 15%, which is generally why you don't want to use the old version of IBR anymore, right? So SAVE is going to have a much lower payment compared to the older version of IBR, just based on how the equation works. So if you were earning $125,000 of taxable income per year under SAVE, your discretionary income, right, part of this formula here, the discretionary income would be $92,000. For pay as you earn of the new version of IBR, the discretionary income is $103,000. Right, so you can start to see why the payment is a little bit lower. 10% of that comes out to about $770 per month, versus pay and the new version of IBR is about $860 a month. Right, so about $100 difference there per month for SAVE versus pay as you earn using this particular income level in a family size of 1. Right, so this is significantly lower than, say, the standard 10-year plan payment with $200,000 of student loans, right, which was $2,200. Right, there's a significant amount of cash flow to be had there to help with your other critical financial wellness items, rather than just plugging a bunch of money towards your student loans. And this table basically shows you some examples, right, of how much income you need to show for a single person in order to generate a given payment, right? And some of the payments I see veterinarians making, right, they're trying to pay $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 a month towards their student loans, right? Unless or until your income reaches some pretty significant levels, you really shouldn't be paying those kinds of payments towards your student loans, right? That's what the income-driven plans teach us. It's like, you don't have to pay that much towards your student loans. Pay what your income requires, right? If you want to not only pay less towards your student loans if you're working towards public service loan forgiveness, but if you want to have a financial plan that involves something other than just paying your student loans. So should I switch to SAVE from IBR with public service loan forgiveness? Yes, absolutely. Right, now, when you switch is going to depend on what your minimum monthly payment is currently when you're next due to renew, right? And that's what we're going to learn from that student loan physical exam. Okay, so income-driven plan forgiveness, here are the two different types, right? So you can have a potentially taxable version that's triggered under income-driven repayment, generally 20 or 25 years into repayment, or we've got a public service loan forgiveness, which is non-taxable, that is eligible after making 10 years of qualifying payments. Right, so we've got these two different forgiveness clocks that are kind of running in parallel if you're working for a nonprofit. Right, so you've got your public service loan forgiveness clock. You also have the forgiveness clock that's ticking while you're using an income-driven repayment plan, right? Because they come with forgiveness as well, right? So generally speaking, pay as you earn, new version of IBR, 20 years of payments until you reach forgiveness. A plan like SAVE and graduate school loans require 25 years of payments before you reach forgiveness, and those loans are automatically canceled. Right? And depending on what the tax laws are at that time, you may or may not have to pay tax. Right now, there is a tax exemption for any student loan forgiveness, whether it's public service loan forgiveness or it's achieved under an income-driven plan. Right, so there's a special law that said any student loan forgiveness received between 2021 and 2025 will not have to be counted as taxable income at the federal level. Right now, public service loan forgiveness is always non-taxable, regardless of when it happens. Right, so this is where I see quite a bit of confusion when it comes to navigating these and wondering what the tax might be or how much it's going to be, and which then also leads to like the questions that were asked earlier: should I pay more so I can reduce the tax? And generally, no. Right, if you're going to hit the tax is a good thing. Right, the tax is, people call it the tax bomb. Right, but in reality, it ends up as a huge discount. Right, public service loan forgiveness, you get 100% discount on whatever's remaining. Currently, anybody that receives forgiveness between 2021 and 2025 get 100% discount on whatever's remaining. Right, but even if, let's say that they don't renew this tax exemption, and then any income-driven plan payment is income-driven plan forgiveness is considered taxable income after 2025. Right, what's the top marginal tax bracket at the federal level? Right, it's around 37%. Right, so the worst case scenario, I'm paying 37 cents on the dollar of what's remaining of my student loans. That's a pretty good deal. Right, that's a huge discount. I'm getting a 63% discount. Right, and the reality is nobody's really probably going to end up in that highest tax bracket when they hit forgiveness. Is going to be some blended rate that's less than that. Right, so you shouldn't be avoiding forgiveness if it's likely or projected that you're to reach it, whether it's public service loan forgiveness or the income-driven plan repayment forgiveness. Public service loan forgiveness specifically, just to make sure everybody is on the same page of how to obtain that, right? So only direct loans are eligible. Right now, some of you may have loans other than direct loans. You're going to see that in your physical exam of your student loan. So if I come back to my example and I'm looking at my different loan, in this case, I've got loan groups, right? I see all direct loans here. At one point, we had a different type of loan, right? And if I hit the loan types, I can see the subtypes of all those different loans. I see a lot of direct, and then I can come down here, I see that they had Perkins loans. Perkins loans by themselves are not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. But if you consolidate them, they can be, right? So if I see loans in here other than direct loans, Perkins loans, health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, federal family education loans, or FEL program loans, those are all triggers that ding, 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 I need to consolidate and consolidate before the end of this year so I can make the maximum balance eligible for something like public service loan forgiveness. Standard 10-year plan payment is eligible, but think about that, right? If I make payments based on a standard 10-year plan for 10 years, how much am I going to have left to forgive? 0, right? So if you did happen to make a standard 10-year plan payment or a couple of years of standard 10-year plan payments, they will still be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, but stop doing that, right? You want to have the maximum amount forgiven, so you're going to want to use an income-driven plan, which is almost certainly going to result in a monthly payment minimum that's lower than a standard 10-year plan for anyone with a veterinary sized student debt balance. They did alter the employment requirements language. That just happened on July 1st of this year, right? So instead of saying full time, right, they say you have to be averaging at least 30 hours per week with a nonprofit or any number of nonprofits, right? So if you had multiple part-time positions that added up to 30 hours per week, that would also make you eligible for public service loan forgiveness. But this should make the residency much easier to get qualified for public service loan forgiveness. Before, I thought it was a slam dunk, right? But there were some institutions and some people who had trouble signing off on the form because of the full-time language. Right, well, the full-time language is gone now, right? So it's just this average of 30 hours per week with qualifying nonprofit, which every veterinary academic institution is a qualifying nonprofit. Requires 120 monthly payments to reach forgiveness. Those pandemic forbearance payments did qualify. Once you hit that 120 threshold, then you can apply to have your loans forgiven under public service loan forgiveness. So consolidate if necessary, right? Use SAVE. SAVE is going to be the lowest monthly payment. Right now, you may have to wait until the next time you're going to renew, right, which is okay, right? But eventually you're going to want to find yourself into SAVE because it's going to maximize that amount that's forgiven. If you're married, consider filing your taxes separately, because then you can exclude your spouse's income from the calculation. Again, coming back to that idea that you want to have the maximum amount forgiven, particularly under public service loan forgiveness. I would highly recommend that you submit this employment certification form at least annually, right? Because you don't have to do that, but at the end, you're going to have to document how you got to the 120 monthly qualifying payments. If you submit one of those each year, then when you get to the 120 monthly payment finish line, you have all of those employment certification forms that you can submit with them, rather than trying to piece together a 10-year history of student loan payments at the end. Right? It also helps to identify any errors, right? So if maybe you've got some loans that aren't eligible for public service loan forgiveness, or something is not quite right, you'll have an opportunity to fix that sooner rather than later, instead of waiting all the way until year 9 to scramble to then try to correct anything that might not have been kosher in your public service loan forgiveness pathway. This is happening, right? So even under the expanded rules, there was a temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. That's actually still in place. So people that might not have been using the right repayment plan for the last several years because it was so confusing, they're going back and kind of giving a second pass at that, right? And the early returns of that have been very positive, right? So 42 billion for more than 615,000 borrowers just since October of 2021. Right. So, people that say, well, nobody's getting their loans forgiven are just wrong. Right. This is working. So if you're in a position to benefit from it, take advantage of it. This is great to see. This is who I hope is also joining sessions like this. Right. So, previously there weren't enough of the academic mentors that were working themselves to reach public service loan forgiveness, where they could actually counsel some of their house officers through this process. But now you guys are in there, right? There are those of you that are the academicians who are knocking on the door of public service loan forgiveness, who are in a great position to teach those folks behind you how to do this, right? And how to learn from your mistakes, right? So if you're almost there, and good on you for coming to sessions like this to help our younger colleagues navigate this, because again, it's the last thing on your mind. I can tell you that just from my wife's experience. Like, student debt is the last thing on her mind going through a residency, right? But it needs to be one of those first things that you take care of correctly, because it's really hard to go back in time, right? Right now, everybody has kind of a rare time machine, right? So with that one-time forgiveness count, which we're going to get to in just a second, this is a amazing opportunity to clean up all of that oops, I didn't know that kind of stuff. But that expires by the end of this year, right? And then after that, we're going to have to work really hard to make sure there's no more oopses from the people who are still in school that want to take the same pathway that you're taking, right? So take advantage of these really unique opportunities that you have to clean up a lot of that mess that I know a lot of you kind of have made of your student loans along the way. Some of the ones that I see, and I'm not sure if I have that example or not. I didn't. That didn't make it over to this computer in time. There was a third case that I had of someone who had switched gears, right? So they had started in private practice, found themselves in a residency a few years later, paid a bunch of money towards their student loans, and now they're asking about public service loan forgiveness, right? You never know where your career may take you, right? That's another one of those reasons why it doesn't pay to be super aggressive with your student loans, right? All that money that she paid prior to the pandemic forbearance benefit period, she can't get back. But now she's likely to reach public service loan forgiveness, which means she voluntarily paid a whole bunch more money towards her student loans than she otherwise had to. Right. So you never know where that career may take you. And again, these repayment plans are so beneficial that it really just doesn't make a lot of sense for you to pay more than you have to towards your student loans. Just to give you an example, this one I show a lot. This was somebody who received forgiveness under that temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program, and this is a little old now, but it's very dramatic, right? $430,000 of student loans just wiped away, right? Zero, because they did the right things, paid attention to their student loans, jumped all over that temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness opportunity, and now more than $400,000 of student loans are now zero. Right. So again, these benefits are out there. Don't discount them. You know, the more you know, the better this can help. Okay, so I'm just going to give you, and now that everybody has kind of that baseline information, I'm just going to share with you how I handle my student loans and why I'm so passionate about this. So I'm a veterinarian. My wife's a veterinarian. She's an internist here in Colorado where we live. Combined, we have more than $400,000 of student debt. Now, along the way, you know, this is kind of how we discovered these plans, right? With the help of Paul Pyan, the co-founder and CEO of VIN, who was getting a lot of questions from the veterinary community around the same time. Hey, how do we make this work? All of our mentors are telling us to pay our loans back as fast as possible. Well, that's what this would have looked like for us, right? $4,500 a month, right? That's a non-starter for most people. So we have to find some other way to make that work, right? That's where we started with the old version of IBR. We switched to revised pay-as-you-earn when it became available, right? So these things are fluid. They kind of change over time. We had the pandemic forbearance benefits, no payments, no interest, still counted towards forgiveness, super beneficial, right? Allowed us to, you know, really jumpstart our overall financial wellness. It allowed us to start a family, right? Which was difficult, right? We had to go through multiple rounds of IVF, not inexpensive, right? So that's but we still finally got to the finish line there, right? So we had Lucy a little over a year and a half ago. And, you know, that's been a huge life change, but financially, we were able to do that based on, in large part, using these income-driven repayment plans. And now we're going to have the opportunity to use Save, which is going to otherwise lower that monthly payment and still keep us on a track to reach forgiveness. And in our case, the forgiveness is likely to be taxable, right? I hope it's not, but I'm planning as if it will be, right? And we're about 80% to that target with 14 years before we hit forgiveness, right? Which means essentially we're ahead of schedule, right? So you can start, and as long as you use time to your advantage, right? This dotted line is the amount that we've contributed ourselves. This dark line is the value of the fund. Everything else in between means that I'm, you know, using the power of investing to reduce that amount I'm going to pay in taxes if I have to pay that tax at all. Right. So this is how we approach that student loan payment. We keep the payment low. We, you know, contribute a little amount to our forgiveness plan at this point, but this thing is essentially on autopilot now. The dividends alone will cover our projected target in 14 years. So I don't really need to contribute any more to this if I don't want to. But also I have the time to adjust if tax rates go up, if tax rates go down, if we learn that for some reason I don't have to pay a tax at the end of this thing, then I've got a bonus fund that I can use for something else at that time, right? So it just gives me a lot more flexibility than paying more than I otherwise have to based on our financial plans. All right, any other questions about the general student loan physical exam before I kind of move into that one-time forgiveness count and some of the more detailed changes?
Not necessarily the physical exam, but there were a couple of questions discussing filing taxes when married, but filing separately. Are you able to file jointly sometimes, separately others? There's a question here. Sorry, where was it at? There it is. Is it allowable to go back? And then is there anything that you have to do to have your salary considered separate from your partner's salary until the next tax return? So anything to do now if you filed jointly most recently?
Yeah, cool. Those are definitely some good strategy questions. And I think those, you know, so the way to think about it when you apply for an income-driven plan is they're going to ask you, are you married? Right? It's a yes or no question. Are you married? And then if you say yes, they're going to say, well, how did you file your most recent tax return? Right? If it was joint, then you have to provide income information for both of you, right? Or you can use that joint tax return, right? If the answer is we filed separately, then you only have to provide your income information, or you can use that separate tax return AGI, right? Now, the one where it gets a little bit iffy is where I'm in the middle here somewhere. I got married. I haven't had a chance to file a tax return with my spouse yet. The pathway is still the same, right? They ask you the question, are you married? Yes. How did you file your most recent tax return? Well, it was neither jointly nor separately. It was single, right? So they're still going to require you to provide your spouse's income information until you have a recent tax return on file that says you filed separately. There is an opportunity for you to say, I don't have access to my spouse's income, right? Which you can use if that is the case, right? But that's a little fuzzy, right? So generally speaking, in those cases where it's like, well, I got married, I don't have a joint or separate tax return on file yet, I'll kind of use whatever information I have handy that's going to satisfy the rules. And then once I get to a point where I do then have a separate tax return on file, I'll apply, I'll apply to have my payment recalculated using that separate income. And to the question about whether or not you can change tax filing statuses, you can do that every year, right? Every year you have to decide, am I going to file married filing jointly or married filing separately, right? That is up to you and the tax code and what's going to make the most sense. But the next time you're due to renew or apply for your income-driven plan, they're going to ask you, how did you file your most recent tax return? Right? So whatever that most recent one was is going to determine if you have to provide your spouse's income information in that equation. And you can, there was a unique opportunity here. Somebody asked about going back, and you can go back and amend taxes from separately to jointly up to 3 prior tax years. But the same is not true from jointly to separately. You can only amend one from separately to jointly. And why would you want to do that? Well, a lot of people were filing their taxes. One of the only reasons, I mean, there's a few other oddball reasons, but one of the primary reasons anybody would file their taxes as married filing separately is because of the student loans. Right now, during the pandemic forbearance, people were still filing their taxes separately because they thought that that was going to keep their payment low for whenever payments were going to get turned back on. And the payments kept getting more postponed and postponed and postponed, covering 3 different tax years. Right? So you could actually go back and amend those prior separate tax returns to filing jointly and get the tax benefits and probably a refund if you want to visit that opportunity with your accountant. Right? So those are just opportunities that you have available based on the bizarro benefits that have been in place for the last 42 months or so. All right, so specifically, what has changed in the world of student loans? So SAVE, which we've talked about a lot, Saving on a Valuable Education, came out of changes to revised pay-as-you-earn. Monthly payments is going to be the lowest. The biggest benefit to SAVE is this 100% unpaid interest subsidy. Right. So for those of, and now that doesn't matter so much if you're going to end up hitting public service loan forgiveness, but for those of you that aren't quite sure or you switch gears, having your interest entirely covered by the Department of Education because your payment otherwise wouldn't have covered the interest is a huge benefit. Right. One of the biggest complaints of income-driven plans was watching your unpaid interest balance grow. And that is a side effect of income-driven repayment when your monthly payment is below the monthly interest that accrues, right? But no longer if you're using SAVE. Right now, pay-as-you-earn, IBR, they still have that problem, right? If your monthly payment is less than the monthly interest accrual, you will see an unpaid interest balance, but you will not see an unpaid interest balance with SAVE. One of the biggest improvements to revised pay-as-you-earn of SAVE is the fact that you can file your taxes separately from your spouse and not have to provide your spouse's income. Repay didn't care if you filed your taxes jointly or separately. If you were married, they wanted to see your spouse's income. Right? SAVE kind of did away with that quirk of revised pay-as-you-earn. You do have this opportunity to switch away from SAVE to IBR 2014 if you're eligible for it, but you also have to make sure that you have less than 60 monthly payments in SAVE in order to be eligible to do so. We talked about the phase out for pay as you earn. If you're currently using it, if the best plan for you, you can keep using it. You've got a little bit of time left to decide, right, up to July 1st, 2024, if you want to use pay as you earn as your primary student loan repayment plan. All right, so one-time forgiveness count adjustment. This is the biggie, right? So this is the one that is going to help you clean up all of the mess that might be your student loans. So essentially, any prior repayment time and certain deferment and forbearance time is considered forgiveness eligible. Right, so the time prior to consolidation is also eligible for forgiveness credit. Right, so previously, and I have been telling people for years to avoid consolidation if you already have forgiveness qualifying credit, because it will, quote, restart your clock. That has been suspended, right, under the one-time forgiveness count adjustment. Right, so if I had loans, the biggest benefit here is kind of in the example that I shared with you earlier, right? So if I've got these differing amounts of forgiveness eligible time, if I consolidate them all together, I'm going to get the maximum number across the new consolidation loan, right? That's the benefit that the one-time count adjustment provides. Right, under public service loan forgiveness, or even if you're not going to hit public service loan forgiveness, if I had loans from undergrad that I made payments on for a few years before I started taking veterinary school loans, and I didn't consolidate them because I didn't want to restart my clock, if you consolidate them all now, you could increase your overall forgiveness eligible time. Right, if you don't automatically reach forgiveness, those adjustments will be applied in 2024, so we'll get to see what our income-driven repayment forgiveness count is. So the closer you can get to 20 or 25 years under an income-driven plan, or 10 years under public service loan forgiveness, the sooner you'll reach forgiveness. Right, and this person who provided this is a perfect illustration here. Right, I'm enrolled in public service loan forgiveness using, and again, there's that IBR plan language. Maybe that's actually IBR. Hopefully it's not. Maybe it's, pay as you earn, or even the new SAVE plan. Took my first loans in 2005, vet loans in 2011. That, to me, suggests you should consolidate. You're going to boost your forgiveness eligible time. And if you're working towards public service loan forgiveness, you can even make those older loans receive that credit as well. So here's the language that kind of documents that right under the studentaid.gov website. Unfortunately, the consolidation application is going to put a lot of scary language in front of you that says, if you do this, you're going to restart your clock. But again, all of that has been suspended under this one-time forgiveness count adjustment. So as long as you submit that consolidation before the end of this year, you will receive that adjustment that is promised under that forgiveness count adjustment language. We've got a lot of different resources that we've posted. I posted recently frequently asked questions about the one-time count adjustment, and there's links to these here. You guys will all receive an email with a link to this presentation as well, so you can click through those resources too if you have some questions after this. All right, so in addition to public service loan forgiveness doing a pretty good job of canceling people's loans, this one-time account adjustment, just the first round of folks who have received this, is over $39 billion of student loans canceled across 800,000 borrowers, right? So again, and a lot of them are our colleagues, right? So you'll see a lot of those on the student debt message board area of people who have already received these forgiveness letters. There was just an article that was just released in VIN News yesterday that chronicles a veterinary colleague of ours who just received one of these cancellations of over $100,000 of student loans, who had been in repayment for more than 25 years. So again, all of this stuff is happening. You just have to put yourself in a position to see it and receive it. So when are you next due to renew your income documentation, right? So normally it's on an annual basis, right? So your loans are going to have what's called an anniversary date, right? So this is another piece of information that we can find in our My Student Loan Summary. So when I hit this Loan Groups tab and I go to where I see that repayment plan under the details section, I see an anniversary date. Right now, this anniversary date is coming up quickly for this person, right? But this is where those pandemic forbearance benefits are still kind of lingering, right? So nobody is required to provide income documentation between October of this year and 6 months after that, right? So even if our anniversary date says this, right, we can add 1 year to it, right? So this person's payment will stay at $480 a month until next October, right? At which point they may want to consider switching to save, right? So exercise here, and this is one of the things that Rebecca and I have been doing on the message boards for a lot of people recently, is helping them understand, if I were to apply for save now, is my payment going to be higher or lower than what I'm currently having to pay, right? So you can do that same exercise, right? So if you calculate what your save payment would be, is it higher or lower than what you're currently paying? When am I next due to renew? Does it make sense to wait? In this case, probably. I know will come with that unpaid interest issue, right? So we're calculating, we've got $1,300 a month of interest that's accruing. We're making a payment that's less than that. As long as I'm in pay as you earn, my unpaid interest balance will continue to grow, right? But once I switch to that save plan, this will no longer grow, right? So these are kind of the pros and cons that you're weighing when you're deciding which pathway do I hit next, right? And that's where this question is really important. Perfect timing, right? Should I switch now, since my payment is otherwise pretty low because it's based on income from maybe 3 years ago? Leave it, leave it until you absolutely have to renew again, right? And then you can switch to save, which will generate an otherwise lower payment than you would if you continued on in that current plan. All right, any other questions about the one-time forgiveness count adjustment? All right, we'll click on this one, see.
Yeah, I would say not about the one-time forgiveness count
Okay.
adjustment, but there is a question here in the chat about what about residencies where we were considered graduate students despite working residency style workloads?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would definitely revisit that employment certification form, right? And hopefully, maybe you'll find one of those mentors of yours who is also working towards public service loan forgiveness, who's willing to sign that form for you. But those changes to the employment language should make that much easier, right? Because all of you guys as residents are working a hell of a lot more than 30 hours a week, right? So you easily meet the spirit and requirements of those employment certification forms, right? But where people are, some of the institutions and some of the directors got hung up on that language before was that quote full time, right? Which is where that graduate student portion plays in, right? So I would revisit that conversation. If you were previously denied before, revisit that conversation with them and show them the updated public service loan forgiveness employment certification form, which doesn't have that confusing full-time language in it anymore. All right, so strategies. So we've covered a lot of those already, but we're just going to kind of highlight some of the specific ones to these residency and specialty pathways, right? So when it comes to making payments, the best is not always the fastest is not always the cheapest, right? I do see a lot of people who are just hell-bent on paying their loans back, their student loans back, as fast as possible, right? Which begs the question, what happens if you don't, right? And we've got tons and tons of examples of people who haven't, right? And generally speaking, nothing happens, right? You can still do anything and everything you want to do. You just have to manage that student loan balance along the way, right? It won't prevent you from doing anything, right? But you can put up some artificial barriers that will, right? So if you say, I can't buy a home until I pay off my student loans, well, that's an artificial barrier, right? You don't have to, it doesn't have to be an either or, it could be a both and, right? And the income-driven plans allow you to do that. And they'll often save you money along the way, right? If nothing else, it reduces the risk to your cash flow, right? And that's, that to me is the biggest benefit of these income driven plans, right? As my income goes up, payments go up, same percentage, right? But if my income goes down for any reason, right? Family leave, take some time off to, raise a family, or I otherwise cut back, right? If my income is dependent upon production and I'm not working as much as I used to, and my income goes down, my student loan payment goes down. Right? If I'm working towards public service loan forgiveness because I'm working for a nonprofit, maybe I'm otherwise taking a lower salary than I could get in private practice, right? I don't have to be forced to pay off my loans faster. I can benefit from public service loan forgiveness using the income driven plans, right? And that's going to also boost my cash flow so I can save for retirement, buy a home, start a family, do other things that I otherwise feel like I can't do because my student loans are in the way. Right? And in most cases, and particularly public service loan forgiveness case, it's going to reduce your overall costs as well, right? So it's kind of a win-win-win there, right? It's confusing, right? But financially hugely helpful. After running thousands of these simulations, we see some themes arise, right? I'm likely to, if I'm starting with a debt to income ratio that's less than 1, I'm likely to pay my balance to 0 before I reach forgiveness. I may not even reach public service loan forgiveness, right? Because when my starting debt to income ratio is less than 1, my payment it starts to approach what a standard 10-year plan payment might be, which means I'm likely to pay that balance to 0 in less than 10 years, which makes it less likely for me to reach public service loan forgiveness. The exception to that is if you can get your residency time to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And many of our colleagues have. It really depends on the institution and the person that you find to sign that form for you, right? So if you can get that internship in an academic institution, the next 3 years of residency at that academic institution to qualify for public service loan forgiveness, even if your starting debt to income ratio is 1, it's quite likely that you're going to reach public service loan forgiveness, right? So it really just kind of depends on how you navigate that particular pathway. But either way, you're going to be fine, right? So you're going to pay relatively little of your income towards your student loans, and you'll either pay the balance to 0 or you'll reach public service loan forgiveness. Either is a great outcome, right? If your starting debt to income ratio is greater than 2, which is quite common for many of our recent veterinary school graduates, right, then you're going to reach forgiveness most likely, even as a specialist. Right? It depends on the specialty and how long it takes you to get to that specialty income, right? But there's a really good chance that you're going to reach forgiveness under a plan like SAVE, or particularly if you have the opportunity to switch to the new version of IVR and receive forgiveness after 20 years of payments, right? So in those cases, you want to pay the minimum, plan for the forgiveness. And of course, when your circumstances change appreciably, like when you finish training and reach that specialty income level, that's a trigger to reassess, right? Run some simulations to see, am I still projected to reach forgiveness, or is it a slam dunk that I'm not going to, right? So those are opportunities that you have to assess that particular strategy. So what is your student debt to income ratio now, right? If my debt to income ratio is less than 1, I'm going to use SAVE because it's going to reduce my payment, particularly during training and shortly thereafter. Right, as my income continues to increase, if it reaches that standard 10-year plan payment amount, then I'll either switch to the standard 10-year plan or I'll leave my loans in SAVE and I'll accelerate my monthly payment. You can have a payment under SAVE that's actually greater than a standard 10-year plan payment, right? And if that's the case, then you'll accelerate your payment, but it'll be based on your income, which is more favorable than paying more than you have to before your income allows. So when might your debt to income ratio be less than 1 if it's not already? When you get your forgiveness time, right? If you see your public service loan forgiveness qualifying time, or next year when you see your forgiveness count adjustment time, how much longer do you have until you reach forgiveness? We have to account for that as well. Some of the biggest mistakes I see when people are running their simulations is they don't account for the time they've already logged towards forgiveness. And they think, well, I'm not gonna hit forgiveness anymore because the income ratio is not 1, but I've got 15 years of qualifying repayment time. Well, that's not true, right? You only have 10 years left before you hit forgiveness under an income-driven plan, right? So you have to account for that time you have left before forgiveness triggers as well. If my debt to income ratio is greater than 1, right? I know this is kind of a spaghetti mess of text here, but let's go through it, right? If I'm heading for public service loan forgiveness, I eventually want to end up in SAVE. Right? It's going to have the lowest monthly payment. It's going to increase the amount that's going to be forgiven. If I'm not going to reach public service loan forgiveness and I'm eligible for IBR 2014, then I may use SAVE for the maximum amount of time I can, switch to the new version of IBR, reach forgiveness at 20 years instead of 25 years. If I'm not eligible for the new version of IBR and I'm not headed for public service loan forgiveness, then am I eligible for pay as you earn, right? That's our case that we've been looking at, right? So if I come back here and I look at the income driven repayment eligibility tab, they're currently using pay as you earn. They're eligible for SAVE. They're not eligible for the new version of IBR, right? But they're really close to public service loan forgiveness, right? And they have a very favorable monthly payment, right? So I'm going to let that run out until I'm next due to renew, switch to SAVE. So I have the lowest monthly payment possible until I reach the 120 months and then apply for public service loan forgiveness. Right? But if I wasn't going to hit public service loan forgiveness in this particular case, I'd probably want to consider or run some simulations to see if it made sense to stick with pay as you earn, reach forgiveness at 20 years instead of hitting forgiveness in SAVE 5 years later. Right? That takes a little bit more crystal ball to know that, but that's why we use the student loan repayment simulator as well. And I'll hit that in just a second. Special note for those of you that are either doing residencies or are coaching those who are doing residencies, do not defer your loans, right? This is a holdover. It's still kind of hard to beat out of the health professions, but the natural instinct is to get one of these advanced training opportunities and then defer your loans, right? Because it's the easy way to get a zero payment, right? But deferment is a no-no, right? It has been made obsolete since we've had the income-driven plans, right? Deferment doesn't count towards forgiveness. Your interest racks up, and they'll take that interest and they'll add it to your principal after that deferment ends, right? So you didn't do yourself any good other than pausing your student loan payments. You can instead use an income-driven plan, have a payment as low as zero, depending on what your income is. With SAVE, your income needs to be, I can't remember the exact threshold, but I think it's greater than $40-something thousand a year before it even triggers a payment that's greater than zero. Right, so you have a stellar opportunity there to log some qualifying time, probably time towards public service loan forgiveness, right, and not have your unpaid interest accrue or get added to your principal. So don't let your colleagues defer their loans, right? If you're deferring your loans now, get out of them, right? Get out of that deferment, get into an income-driven plan, probably one like SAVE. These academic residencies, this happened to my wife when she was doing hers. Oftentimes, and somebody alluded to it, you're considered a grad student again, right? You're enrolled in school at least half time, right? The system is set up to automatically defer your loans, right? So you can waive that though, or you can tell them, I don't want that to happen. I want to keep my loans in repayment, ultimately in an income-driven plan, but you have to do that before the system automatically defers them. Right? So ideally, before you enroll in these graduate school classes, right? So if you're doing a master's of clinical sciences, for example, right, you want to reach out to your loan servicer and say, hey, I know you're going to get a deferment request from the Department of Education. Please ignore that. Keep my loans in an income-driven plan. Sometimes those servicers have like a form you can fill out to waive that deferment. Other times you just have to tell them. Right, but you do want to be on top of that because every semester that you're enrolled in classes, the system is going to want to put your loans in deferment. Usually you only have to waive it once and it'll keep it waived until you tell them otherwise, but I would still keep an eye on that, right? Because you don't want your loans to end up in a deferment, and it can be hard to tell the difference between a deferment and a $0 payment, right? So that's where I'm doing those physical exams of my student loans to make sure I can confirm that one way or another. And that deferment time doesn't count towards forgiveness, right? Those in-school time is particularly problematic. Any questions on that? That's what I see a lot. That's one of those sneaky, it just kind of happened because you guys are crazy busy and you didn't notice it, or they'll send a letter out that says, hey, we have deferred your loans, but if you didn't get that, or it just kind of ends up in the recycling bin, then you may miss that notification, right? So, and again, it can be very difficult to know the difference between a $0 payment on an income-driven plan and a deferment, right? So they look very similar when you log into your loan servicer portal, particularly during these pandemic forbearance benefit timeframe.
Actually, that is the question we have is, so did they put them in deferment during the payment pause? I'm afraid I may have been in deferment for the last year now.
No, so the differentiator there is the pandemic forbearance benefits were a forbearance, right? So it'll say forbearance. Right now, if your loans were in a deferment before the forbearance triggered, right, then when the forbearance ends, they'll be put back into deferment, right? So that's one of those things you're going to want to tease out, right? Get that student aid data file, upload it into the My Student Loans tool, and if you don't see a plan, a payment plan here, right, then do some investigating, right? If it just says forbearance, right? If it says deferment, right? If you see a monthly payment that's zero and it doesn't have a repayment plan that can have a payment of zero, like an income-driven plan, you just want to confirm with your loan servicer that you're actually in an income-driven plan and you're not somehow stuck in a deferment. Right? Those deferments are particularly unhelpful. Another good tip-off is having an anniversary date.
Mhm.
You'll only have an anniversary date if you're actually in an income-driven plan. Right, so those are pieces of information I'm looking for in that My Student Loan summary to give me those clues that my loans are in a more favorable plan, something more favorable than a deferment.
And if you did end up in a deferment because you didn't realize, is there anything that you can do to undig from that error?
Well, if you have an opportunity to consolidate, then you might, and you're consolidating your loans that otherwise have some repayment plan time, then you might be able to get some credit for that time still, right? So that's where that one-time forgiveness count and that ability to consolidate might help you clean up that mess. But otherwise, not really, right? So in-school deferment time is not considered forgiveness eligible, even under the one-time count adjustment, right? But if you had loans that had some repayment time above and beyond what your, say, veterinary school loans had, then you might be able to boost some of that overall portfolio forgiveness time by consolidating them together. Right, so this is where, and there's a perfect lead in to the kind of the consolidate if. Do I need to consolidate my loans? If you've got anything other than direct loans, then do it. Right, health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students. Now, you're not going to find those in your student aid file, right? But you might find them lingering around if you check your credit report, right? Or if you log into your veterinary school financial aid account. Or another good tip off is if you have a loan servicer named Heartland or ECSI. They're kind of the big national loan servicer for these health profession student loans, right? But those can be consolidated and included in your income-driven plan. And with the one-time forgiveness count, you won't reset the time. You'll actually give everything the maximum forgiveness count that you currently have. But if you know that you have any of these Perkins loans, these older FEL program loans, so if you were in college at any point before July 1st of 2010, that you might have these older FEL program loans, they were the precursor to the direct loans. So you want to consolidate those, right? And you want to do that before the end of this year. If you've got repayment or public service loan forgiveness time, like the example I've been sharing with you, right, that has different numbers in it, consolidate them and then resubmit your employment certification forms so you can get that maximum qualifying time across that new consolidation loan. This is another one that I see is unique to you all, right? And these are pretty infrequent, but some of you graduate veterinary school and matriculate right into some kind of residency or PhD program. And if you don't consolidate your loans before you start that program, usually that program, you start that next program during your veterinary school loan grace period. And that is hugely problematic, right? Because you can't get loans out of that grace period without consolidating them first. This one's hard to undo, right? So this is more of a FYI for anybody behind you, right? So if you happen to be a mentor or in charge of one of these types of combined PhD or academic residencies that happen immediately after veterinary school, you have to talk to those folks about getting their loans out of that veterinary school grace period before they start that program, right? So typical time course, we finish veterinary school around May, right? You start some kind of next program in that next semester, which is August, September, right? That still falls within that 6-month veterinary school loan grace period. If you leave those loans in that grace period and start that program before that grace period ends, those loans get stuck in that in-school program for the duration of whatever this plan is. And if it happens to be a PhD program, that could be like 6 or 7 years of interest that just accrues without getting any kind of forgiveness credit, because you can't get any credit when your loans are stuck in an in-school status or a grace period status. Right. So these are the heart wrenchers, right? The people that reach out and they're like, hey, my colleagues are telling me they're getting public service loan forgiveness credit. And I look at their student loans and they're in this combined PhD residency program that they started right after school, and their loans are stuck in this in-school status until they're done. Right, you can't go back and undo that, right? You have to consolidate those loans first so you can end that grace period, get them into an income-driven plan before that next program starts. So kind of a zebra there, but one that I see not infrequently, right? Associated usually with these combined PhD programs. Same applies, though, similar to public service loan forgiveness, and that wasn't the other example that didn't make it because of my power issues today. But let's say you graduate in May, you start your internship in June, and you're rip-roaring ready to get that public service loan forgiveness credit, you can't start getting the public service loan forgiveness credit until you get your loans out of the grace period. Right? So if there happens to be anybody here that graduated in 2023, right, if you're 3 months into your internship right now, none of that time counts towards public service loan forgiveness because your loans are still stuck in the grace period. Right? You have to consolidate, choose to end the grace period, which means do not delay processing. That's the formal language you select as part of the consolidation application. That will put your loans into an income-driven plan as soon as that consolidation loan is complete. Then from that point forward, as long as that overlaps with your eligible employment, you start to receive public service loan forgiveness credit. Right, so the timing is really important there. All right, in the interest of time, since we started a little bit late, I'm going to skip through that capitalization change. You guys can read through those. So top mistakes. This is a picture of our daughter. This is the first time one of the dogs knocked her down outside on the patio, and she smacked her nose and started bleeding all over, and Audra was crying as much as Lucy was bleeding. So it was our first oops with the baby. So common mishap, right? Big deal when it happens, but we worked through it, and everybody came out better for it on the other side, right? But these are some of the common mishaps that I see people making with their student loans, right? So assuming an income-driven plan is not going to work, or you're somehow not going to get forgiveness, that's just not true, right? So these things are baked into the law that governs your student loans, right? So to believe that something else terrible is going to happen is to really kind of not believe in the law. So, people still believe those things, but generally it's just not true. So if you could take advantage of these, put yourself in a position to do so, it'll be more likely than not that you actually receive those benefits. Procrastination on the consolidation, right? So we just kind of talked about that. Generally speaking, anybody that's going that internship, residency, specialty pathway should immediately consolidate their loans after they graduate. That's the best case scenario. Right now, you guys all have a unique opportunity, if you didn't do that, to look at your loans and see if it makes sense for you to consolidate before the end of this year, so you can potentially boost your forgiveness eligible time. Right, so look at those student loans, reach out, ask questions if you're not sure about what you're seeing, and Rebecca and I can help you work through those student loan questions and that one-time forgiveness count adjustment. New grads who choose income-based repayment, I'm still seeing this, right? And again, I think that has a lot to do with just the confusion around the different names of the plans. People are like, oh, they talked a lot about IBR. I'm going to choose IBR. IBR is probably not the best plan for you to get started with. It may be the best plan for you to finish with, but it's generally never the best plan to start with, right? Especially now. Using deferments, missing renewals, right? If you're going to use an income-driven plan, especially now that we're coming out of these forbearance benefits, we're all going to have to get reacquainted with those annual renewals. We have to provide that income information at least annually. If your income decreases, you can even provide it sooner to have the payment calculated lower. Paying more than your income requires, right? So people are still doing that too. They're on a path to reach public service loan forgiveness and they're paying more than their income requires, trying to reduce the tax that they're not going to have to pay, right? So don't pay more than your income requires when you're using an income-driven plan. You've got way better things that you can do with your money. And that kind of leads into the next one, right? So, you know, instead of saving for retirement or saving for a down payment on a home or, you know, buying into a practice or starting your own practice, people are voluntarily paying more towards their student loans when there are better things that they can do with that money. This is another one that I see. This was a bigger problem before when the interest rates were crazy low, is that they wanted to refinance their federal student loans. Your student loans are about way more than an interest rate, right? Even if you could get a lower interest rate in your student loans, which you can't now, they're still not more beneficial, right? All of these other, like you give up public service loan forgiveness, you give up the income-driven plans, you give up the ability to have those loans discharged if something terrible should happen to you, right? Most of our colleagues who refinance their student loans generally had to put their spouse or other family member on the hook too in order to get those lowest interest rates, right? Your student loans, your federal student loans don't have that constraint, right? If something terrible happens to you and you can't pay them anymore, they go away with you, right? So be really careful about refinancing those federal student loans, right? Instead, if you want to keep the benefits, but still accelerate that payment, you can cater your own refi if you pay more than is required, if it makes sense for you to do so, right? So if you're not going to hit forgiveness, then that might make more sense for you.
Are you on my Wi-Fi?
I'm not.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm gonna switch
Okay,
it up.
cool. Yep. All right. So just kind of finishing up here, these are the things that I consider to be more critical than your student loans, right? Emergency funds, 3 to 6 months of expenses, right? So having a budget, knowing whether your expenses or knowing what your major monthly expenses are, so you can set that target of 3 to 6 months of expenses. Retirement savings. Now, if you're a resident, that's probably going to be pretty tough, but generally speaking, you should be targeting at least 10 to 15% of your gross income into some kind of tax advantage retirement savings, right? So whether that's a Roth IRA, traditional IRA, a 401k or a 403b, which most of you probably have through your academic employers or something like that, you want to target 10 to 15% of that income into tax advantage retirement savings. Paying off less flexible debt first. If you have credit cards, private loans, other debt, those are going to be way more important than paying off your student loans, even though your student loans are a bigger number, right? So bypass that, just shows you how many people are budgeting, which is about 50-50, which I think is probably actually less than that if we could get them to tell us the truth. But even these things are also more important than paying off your student loans more aggressively. And of course, you know, none of us went to vet school just to pay back our student loans. It's part of the equation, but it's not the only equation. So you will pay off your student loans one way or another, whatever that looks like, whether that's public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment plan forgiveness, or you pay that to zero before you hit any kind of forgiveness. Either is okay, right? If you anticipate hitting income-driven plan forgiveness, then I would plan for a tax. It is likely there's going to be a tax unless we see some extension of that tax exemption. Public service loan forgiveness is not going to have a tax, right? So you can plan for it, but there's really not going to be a tax for you to pay. So if you can't fit that into your budget, it's not the end of the world. Flexibility is ultimately the key, right? So if you need assistance, this is another one of those benefits of being logged in to the Student Debt Center while you're using it. You can click on the Student Debt Message Board link and you can see all of the work that Rebecca and I have been up to. recently. Oh, I can never walk and chew gum here. Talking and trying to enter my secondary security always gets me. But there are thousands, literally thousands of these cases in the student debt message board area that you can learn from. It's kind of hard to, figure out which ones are pertain exactly to you, but we're trying to make the titles a little bit more descriptive so you can pick those out more quickly. But there are tons of circumstances in here, some of them aligned with internships, residencies, specialties. Most of them are GPs because, let's face it, that's the breakdown of our profession, right? The majority of folks graduate veterinary school and go on to general practice. There's about a third of us that go on to internship, residency, specialization, right? So that's kind of what we see too in some of these message board breakdowns. But if there's something that you're struggling with, you want to pick through some of those discussions first to see if you can find the answers to your questions, then great. If not, you can post your own. One of the great things about the student debt message board area is that you have the ability of posting anonymously in here. There's a lot of sensitive financial information, and we recognize that. Becca and I'll know who you are, but the rest of the community doesn't, right? So here's some instructions on generally what we're looking for when you're posting in the student debt message board area. Link to what we call the student debt and income signalment form. Right? So if we really want our help to do a deep dive into your student loans, we definitely need you to fill out that signalment form, right? Because that provides kind of that minimum database of information that we need to adequately answer the questions that you have about your student loans. All of this stuff, again, all academicians, interns, residents, and academic institutions all have free access to VIN. Even if you move beyond that and you don't have access to VIN thereafter, you still have free access to the student debt message board area through VIN Foundation. Right? So don't ever feel like you don't have an opportunity to get answers to your student loan questions. We're here to help our colleagues, remove this as that source of stress from you all so you can get back to, doing what you do best, which is, veterinary medicine, right? So we just have a unique knowledge set here to help navigate those student loans in the most financially advantageous way possible. All right.
We do have a couple of
What
questions hanging
did
out.
I miss?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we got
sure.
a couple questions hanging out in the Q&A here. So someone mentioned that they do have loans with ECSI, the health profession student loans. How do I go about requesting a consolidation of those? There doesn't seem to be a simple way for me to ask them, the servicer themselves.
Yeah, so you're going to want to do that through studentaid.gov, right? So you're going to do this consolidate loans, right? And you'll actually add those loans manually, right? So I'll hit the demo here, but if you'll want to log in, and we'll see if I can do this quickly here. They've expanded this, so I can't get through as quickly as I'd like to, but let's see if I can do some quick clicking and get to the part where you can manually add them here. So you're going to get to this page here where it says select loans to consolidate. It'll automatically find all of the loans that are normally in the studentaid.gov portal, right? So the loans that are in your student aid file. But here is where you can add another loan. Right, and these are all the different types of federal loans that you can add to a consolidation. Now, most of you are not going to have nearly this many different types of loans, but health profession student loans are pretty common. So you'll find them in this list. You'll give them the servicer. In this case, you'll type other. And then you'll fill out as much information in here as you can, right? So the loan amount, the interest rate is always 5% for those health profession student loans. Right, the disbursement date, the account number you'll see is optional, but they'll go and look for those loans, right, and add them to your consolidation. That's how you can add it technically to your consolidation application. And then you don't have to worry about ECSI at all.
Another question about consolidation. Is there any benefit to it at this point if you are in PSLF and SAVE and all of your loans qualify? I'm worried that by consolidating, I'm going to mess something up.
Yeah, and we see that too. You don't necessarily have to, right? If all of your loans are from veterinary school, you have the maximum amount of forgiveness time that you possibly can have right now, and you're not going to gain anything by consolidating. then don't, right? You should be gaining something by consolidating, right? And it's a great question to ask, right? Am I going to gain something? And in your case, it sounds like no, right? But for many of our colleagues, the answer is yes, right? So the one who asked about health profession student loans, you have something to gain, right? The example I've been using, when you have different amounts of public service loan forgiveness credit, you have something to gain. If I had loans from undergrad that I had payment time on, and I didn't consolidate them with my veterinary school loans after graduation, I can do that now, right? So I've got something to gain there, right? But not everybody's going to have something to gain. If you don't have something to gain, there's no reason to go through the process.
A question here about the new repayment plan. I thought that most of the repayment plans weren't actually written into law except for IBR. So the SAVE program as an executive order and could be reversed if a new administration voted and basically made it revert back to repay.
Sure, and that's true. So we've got some plans that are created under executive action and some plans that are actually baked into law. However, you want to use the most beneficial option that you have available to you, right? So the forgiveness provisions are baked into law, right? How you get to them can change, as we've seen with the updates to revised pay as you earn, which turned into SAVE, which we've seen now with phasing out of pay as you earn. Right now, but generally speaking, all of the changes that have been made have made student loan repayment more beneficial rather than less. Right. So I would use the most beneficial plan. Now, if there is some magical universe in the future where somebody says we're wiping out all of the executive action plans and going back to the originals, well, you still got the originals. Right. But that is like that's kind of like meteor level event. That is highly unlikely. Right now, if it does happen, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but it is highly unlikely. It is much more likely that these are going to be executed as they're written or become more beneficial, right? Because that's been the predominant trend we've seen with everything student loan related.
There was a follow-up to that, focusing more on PSLF, and I think this is a concern that we hear quite often about. Is there anything that can be done now to prepare for the worst case scenario of a new administration revoking public service loan forgiveness?
Yeah, so they can't revoke public service loan forgiveness, right? Again, that is baked into the law, and it is governed by the contract that you signed when you took out your direct loans. Public service loan forgiveness is a direct loan feature. They can't just eliminate it. Right now, what they can do is say, we're not going to do direct loans anymore. This is kind of what happened with the FEL program. We discontinued the FEL program. We replaced it with the direct loan program. The direct loans have a little bit different contract than the FEL program loans have, right? The direct loan contract still exists. The FEL contract still exists, right? Those are all going to exist until those particular loans are done, right? Until those things are no longer managed under those contractual obligations, right? So those of you that are currently in repayment and have direct loans now, you're set, you're good. Now, people behind us who haven't started school yet, who haven't started taking out loans, we could see somewhere down the line a different type of loan created that has a different set of repayment options that may or may not include public service loan forgiveness. But the idea that they can just take an eraser and erase public service loan forgiveness is just not grounded in the law, right? That just can't happen. That's why it hasn't happened yet, right? So there is some stability there that I think people take for granted. Now, sure, it's okay. Of course, we're going to be worried because either we're getting close to it or we started logging progress and you see something on the internet that says there's somebody so-and-so wants to get rid of public service loan forgiveness. It just doesn't work like that, right? So it's really good for attracting your attention, but it's not really grounded in reality, right? So we have to really figure out a way to kind of filter out that noise, stay the course, make sure we're doing the best things that we can put ourselves in position to actually experience the benefits as they're currently written into law.
We do have someone here that says this, they graduated vet school in May and started a residency and PhD in July. Are they now going to be stuck in a deferment for their entire program?
Yeah, potentially. If you started classes already, right? So what the trigger there is that I kind of talked about this with the academic residencies that have those masters associated with them. As soon as you enroll in classes again, just like when you were in vet school, when you enrolled in classes and you met a certain threshold, which meant you were enrolled more than half time in the student loan universe, the system set up to see, does this person have student loans? If so, defer them, right? So it's associated with your affiliation with more than a half-time student status. Now, if that program started in the summer, half-time student status is a little bit different, right? So you may have gotten lucky where it hasn't triggered that automatic deferment yet, in which case I would run to get that consolidation started so you can end that grace period, get your loans into repayment, right? And then you'll have the option of waiving that automatic deferment going forward.
There's a question here about applying for consolidation, which is probably a bit of a misnomer. Just because we apply does not necessarily mean that we would be approved, correct? Does it hurt to apply even if the answer is ultimately no to the consolidation?
There isn't a scenario where the answer should be no, right? So if you have eligible federal student loans that can be consolidated and you submit a consolidation application, it will be approved, right? So it's hard for me to envision a scenario where your consolidation will be, quote, denied. Now, if you didn't complete the form accurately, maybe it would just be kicked back to you and say we're missing some information, but there isn't like a credit check or something, right? All you have to have is eligible loans to be consolidated. Now, the one issue that can happen, and this is associated with your loan status after you immediately finish school. Your direct unsubsidized loans. So these ones that you see in here, if I'm in the loan type tab in here, this direct unsubsidized must be in the grace period in order for it to be eligible to be consolidated. Right? All of your other loans will be automatically eligible as soon as you finish school, but because of how these loans are constructed, this unsubsidized loan can sometimes get stuck in a pesky in-school status even after you've graduated. Normally, the day after you graduate, it will be switched from in-school to in grace period, signaling the start of your grace period. For some reason, some loans get stuck in that in-school status for 30, 60 days, even after graduation, and they will not be included in your consolidation. Right, so they have to officially be in that grace period, but that doesn't really prevent, unless you only had direct unsubsidized loan. That's an occasion where the after you submit the application, it'll say you don't have any loans that are eligible for consolidation. Right, and if that's the case, then you need to make some phone calls to your financial aid office to find out why they're still stuck in that in-school status.
Great. We had another question here. If our public service loan forgiveness count is all the same, is there any reason to consolidate?
Probably not, right? That kind of comes back to is there anything for you to gain? Right, so, but it's not just about your public service loan forgiveness count, right? So I can envision a scenario where maybe you had some loans from undergrad that had some repayment time on them, that if you consolidated them all together, you'd still preserve your current public service loan forgiveness count, but you'd boost your overall income-driven repayment count. So for some reason you switch gears and we're no longer working towards public service loan forgiveness, you would shorten the time to reaching income-driven plan forgiveness. Right, so that one that kind of depends on your overall student loan portfolio.
And then I think the last question that I have here is, I guess the risk in regards to switching is if you are currently using pay, switch to save, but then cannot switch back to pay in case of that, the idea that save would be reversed to back to repay based on.
Well, I mean, I highly doubt that save would be reversed to repay, right? So, I mean, again, this is kind of this gets into these like crazy theoreticals, right? I mean, repay was already an executive action plan itself that got updated to save. It's hard for me to, if somebody were going to really tinker with it, they would either eliminate it altogether or they would change it again to something else, like we saw happen with repay to save, right? So that is kind of in that way unlikely realm, and let's cross that bridge when we get to it. But coming back to the idea of not having access to pay as you earn because you otherwise don't have access to new version of IBR, that's a reality, right? That we already know that that's a potential for people just like this, right? If they switch away from pay as you earn to use save because it's going to be best for public service loan forgiveness, and somehow they find a unparalleled private practice opportunity where they're no longer on a public service loan forgiveness track, and now they're past July 1st and they have no way of getting back to pay, they're kind of stuck, right? That's the pickle. I call that the pickle, right? This is the one part of these changes that I think was not helpful, right? Overall, save is extremely helpful, but the way that they phased out pay and left these people that aren't eligible for IBR 2014, specifically graduate school students, on the outside looking in when it comes to having a 20-year forgiveness option, I think that was wrong, right? But overall, they did a pretty good job of changing all this and helping out with the one-time forgiveness count adjustment. But that one pickle is something that these people are going to have to contend with, right? Between now and next July, you're going to have to do the best you can using the clearest crystal ball that you can find to see if pay as you earn makes the most sense and I need to get in it before July 1st, or I'm okay with switching and losing access to pay as you earn.
I think, let me take a look here, but I think we got all of our questions.
All right, cool. Even starting late. So thanks for everybody who stuck around, and my apologies again for the technical difficulties, but thanks for all the excellent questions and interaction, and looking forward to hearing more from this particular group, especially anything we can do to help make more of these residency opportunities eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Please let us know, right? I am of the opinion that all of the veterinary school academic residencies should be approving those employment certification forms, but I don't get to sign them, right? But you guys probably are either the people that can or know the people who can, right? So if you need some help having those conversations, please let me know, right? I would love to see every academic institution marketing that fact that, hey, come do your residency here, stay with us and work here. We know how public service loan forgiveness works, right? I don't know why more of these academic institutions don't do that, right? You've got a baked in benefit for those, the 80 to 85% of us who have federal student loans to help eliminate those through public service loan forgiveness. So as a profession, we could do a better job of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you to ACVIM. Thank you, Tony. And then I also wanted to make sure to remind everybody before you head out is that to keep an eye out for an email in the next couple of days from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org with some follow-up information, as well as a link to that evaluation for CE credit if you were able to join us live. And then I think Jordan's going to drop that CE evaluation link there in the chat as well. So just fill that out and then look for an email with your CE certificate from Jordan@vinfoundation.org. Anything else, Tony, that you want to share, or anything from ACVIM?
No, thank you. Thanks for manning the ship while I work through the power problems, and thank you, Jordan, for helping me behind the scenes here get set up. So looking forward to helping you all guys navigate your student loan repayment questions now and in the future.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thank you.